Hey friends, tonight we're diving into something a little darker. Plagues, punishments, and pottage. Forget the castles and knights Hollywood sold your ill life in the Middle Ages was dirty, brutal, and honestly, you probably wouldn't last a single day. So, before we get too cozy, take a second to like and subscribe only if you genuinely enjoy what we do here. And drop a comment to tell me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. That part's always fascinating. Now, dim the lights, maybe switch on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's begin tonight's journey. Let's imagine you woke up in 38. Yep, that's the year the Black Death started tearing through Europe. But don't worry, you're not coughing yet. You're just waking up in a one-room cottage, lying on a straw mattress that smells like wet dog and moldy bread. Congratulations, you've just been reborn as a peasant. The first thing that hits you? The cold. There's no insulation, no glass windows, and no central heating. Just a small fire pit in the center of the room, and it went out hours ago. You're freezing, you're itchy because lice are your new roommates and your back hurts from sleeping on straw and wood. You reach for your clothes. There are no closets, just a pile of tunics on the floor. And guess what? They smell worse than the mattress. Wool soaked in sweat and smoke. Hygiene? That's a luxury you don't even know you're missing. Baths happen maybe once a year, if that. Soap is rare. Deodorant, non-existent. Toothbrushes, please. Outside, the sun is barely up, but your day's already started. You're not going to school, you're not scrolling TikTok, you're heading to the fields, or worse, you're heading to empty them. You see, in 1348, the Black Death has started whispering through the villages. People are starting to die fast. You hear the rumors, you see the black boils, you feel the dread, but work doesn't stop. You have to harvest grain for the local lord. If you don't, your family doesn't eat, and you might get whipped. So out you go. Mud everywhere. Your boots are made of cloth and barely hold together. You're hungry. Breakfast was some thin barley gruel, basically warm sadness in a bowl. As you trudge along, you pass people on the road. No one smells. Everyone looks tired, gaunt, suspicious. Social life, that's mostly the church and the tavern, if you can afford it. But right now, no one's going to the tavern. People are afraid the plague is here. You don't know what germs are. But you think it's a punishment from God. By mid-morning, you're already exhausted. And then it hits you. You've got to go to the bathroom. Except there's no bathroom. You find a bush. There's no toilet paper, obviously. Just leaves. If you're lucky. If not, well, let's just say you get real creative. Real fast. Lunchtime comes, which means you eat the same thing as breakfast. barley gruel again. Maybe with a bit of onion or turnip if you're lucky. You eat with your hands. Your fingers are caked in dirt. You haven't washed them in days. But that doesn't matter because everyone else is doing the same thing. Germ theory won't be invented for another 500 years. Afternoon means more labor. Your back aches, the sun beats down. You're wearing the same heavy wool tunic you wore yesterday and the day before, and probably every day for the last year. Sweat? Oh yeah, but you don't smell it anymore. You've gone nose blind. Then comes the noise of bell ringing, the church bell. Someone died again. Maybe it was the old woman from the next village. Maybe it was your cousin. Maybe you'll be next. But you can't stop working. Not yet. At sunset, you drag yourself back home. Your feet are bleeding, your hands are blistered, and your reward? A third bowl of barley gruel, maybe some ale. Probably not. Your mother's crying. Your father looks pale. Your little sister has a fever. You fall asleep on that same straw mattress, lice burrowing into your scalp, a rat chewing something near your foot, and the wind howling through the cracks in the wall. But let's say you make it to the next day. Your sister's fever worsens overnight. She starts coughing. You try to comfort her, but you know what's coming. Death isn't a surprise here. It's part of the furniture. The priest shows up, mumbles a blessing, and moves on to the next house. There are too many bodies to bury now. Some villages have started piling them in fields. You don't ask questions. And here's the kicker, you're still a kid, maybe 12 or 13. In the Middle Ages, that makes you a full-grown worker. A few more years, and they'll marry you off. No choice, no dating apps, just a deal between parents and a life that smells like sheep and cabbage. And yet, despite all this, life goes on. Kids still laugh sometimes. People still sing in the evenings, their voices hoarse but warm. It's not all misery, but make no mistake, it's survival. Pure, unfiltered survival. Let's not forget the fear that lives in the silence between moments, the fear that your cough will be the next, that your name will be whispered in the same breath as death. That fear follows you to sleep and greets you in the morning. Every cough from your neighbor sounds like an omen. Even fun isn't fun. Games are played with bones and sticks. There are no toys, no cartoons, no music, unless someone plays a lute or hums a tune passed down for generations. And laughter, it's rare, a treasure. You'd think festivals would offer relief, but even those are grim. They're not about joy. They're about surviving another season. The food is stale, the air reeks of livestock, and the dancing, it's not graceful, it's desperate. People don't celebrate life, they cling to it. So when you say you want to live in medieval times, think again. Think hard. Because surviving even one day was a miracle. And that, my friend, was just one day. You still think you'd survive in the Middle Ages? Let's say you somehow survived that first brutal day. Congratulations. But guess what? You're not off the hook. Because now comes the repetition, the never-ending loop of labor, fear, and survival. If yesterday was your wake-up call, today is your initiation. The sun rises, or at least you think it does. There's no clock, no alarm. Your body is your schedule, and today it screams with soreness. Every muscle aches from the previous day's work. You stretch, but that just makes the pain sharper. You consider staying in bed, but remember, if you're not out in the fields, someone else is. And that someone could easily replace you. You shuffle outside. The village smells worse today. A cart passes, carrying 2 corpses wrapped in linen. You try not to look. You fail. One of them is a boy. Maybe someone you knew, maybe someone you ignored yesterday. Your mother hands you a piece of stale bread. It's hard as stone, but food is food. You chew slowly, hoping it softens with saliva. It doesn't. Your teeth hurt, but you eat anyway. There's no dentist in your future. If one goes bad, it's coming out with a knife or a hammer. At the fields, the work is the same. You tie bundles of wheat, your hands raw and red. You move slower today. Your arms burn, your back screams. A man next to you collapses. No one reacts. They barely glance. He's either sick or weak, and neither is good. You don't ask, you just keep going. By midday, the heat becomes unbearable. There's no hat, no sunscreen, no break room. Just you in the sun, and maybe a sip of murky water, if you're lucky. You squint at the horizon and spot smoke. A house is burning, or maybe a pile. You don't know. You don't ask. Lunchtime is another bowl of, you guessed it, gruel. It's thinner today. Your mother says it's because the grain sacks are running low. You pretend not to worry, but in your head, you wonder how long before there's nothing left. In the afternoon, you're asked to help repair a fence near the edge of the village. It's falling apart. Everything is. You use sticks and rope and whatever you can find. While working, you notice more people walking with carts, some with bags, some with crying children. Refugees fleeing the plague. They ask for food. No one gives it. One woman collapses in front of the fence. You're told not to touch her. Just walk away, you do. But her coughing haunts you the rest of the day. That sound. Wet, heavy, final. Evening comes. Your hands are cut, your knees bruised, and your mind numb. You sit beside the fire pit at home. There's barely any wood left. Your father says he'll gather more tomorrow. You know he won't. He's too weak. He doesn't say it, but you see it in his eyes. Your sister is worse. She doesn't move much now. Her skin is pale, her breathing shallow. You want to cry, but tears feel like a waste. You whisper a prayer, not because you're religious, because it's all you can do. And then it happens. Someone knocks on the door. It's the bailiff. He says there's a new death tax that even the sick must pay, your father argues. The bailiff leaves, but not before taking your last chicken. You go to sleep hungry again and scared again. The wind howls louder tonight. Maybe it's the rats. Maybe it's your thoughts. In the middle of the night, you wake up to coughing. Not your sister's this time. Your own. You panic. Is it the plague? You hold your breath. Try to convince yourself it was dust. You lie awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the creaks and distant moans of a world coming undone. Someone nearby starts wailing, a long, echoing cry that makes your skin crawl. You pull the straw blanket tighter and bury your face in the scratchy fabric. Your mouth tastes like metal. Your heart won't slow down. Eventually, you drift into a restless sleep, plagued by dreams of fire and rats and empty fields. In your dream, you're digging your own grave, and no one is watching. No one comes to stop you. When morning comes, you're surprised. Not because it's morning, but because you're still breathing. But there's no time to process it. The day is already demanding. Another round of labor, of grief, of pretending everything's fine. And it's not just your house anymore. You see it in the neighbors. Their faces gaunt, their hands trembling. The blacksmith hasn't opened his shop in days. The baker's son hasn't been seen since last week. Rumors spread like wildfire. Witches, punishments, divine wrath. Anything to explain what no one understands. You'll see a stranger come into the village square. He's dressed in dark robes, wearing a strange beaked mask. A physician, they say. He carries herbs and burns incense, trying to cleanse the air. People stare. Some hope, others fear. You just watch. Another figure in the chaos. Later, a priest gives a sermon in the rain. His voice is weak, hoarse. He says to repent, that this is the end of days. You don't believe him, but part of you wonders. Because how could this be life? How could this be normal? That night, there's a quiet knock. Not the bailiff, just a girl. Maybe 10. Her face is streaked with dirt, her eyes hollow. She doesn't say a word, just stands there holding a piece of cloth. You invite her in. She sits near the fire, silent. No one asks questions anymore. She stays. You wonder if she'll be there tomorrow, or if she's a ghost already. Outside the storm begins, not just a little rain, but a punishing downpour. Leaks spring from the roof, the fire sputters, cold air pours in from the gaps in the wall. You huddle closer, clutching the girl's blanket tighter around your shoulders. You don't know her name, and she doesn't know yours. But in that moment, you're both just two souls trying to make it through the night. And that, my friend, was just your second day. Still think you'd survive the Middle Ages? It's now your third day. You've survived the brutal wake-up call, endured the soul-numbing repetition, and yet here you are, not thriving, not even coping, just existing. And in the Middle Ages, that's considered a win. The sky outside is gray, not from clouds, but from smoke. More fires, more homes burning, more silence than you can stand. The village feels hollow. You notice fewer voices, fewer footsteps, fewer signs of life. Even the birds seem to have left. Breakfast is a half-rotten apple you found behind the house. It's mushy, brown, but edible. You share it with the girl who showed up last night. She hasn't said a word. Still hasn't. You don't ask. You don't speak much either. Your father doesn't wake up this morning. You try to shake him? Nothing. Your mother doesn't scream. She just sits beside him and folds his hands together. It's not even shocking anymore. It's just another loss, another subtraction from a life already reduced to scraps. No time to grieve. The fields still need hands. You and your mother bury him behind the cottage, a shallow grave with no marker. The ground is cold and stiff. It takes an hour just to dig deep enough. You want to cry, but the tears won't come. Maybe it's the shock. Maybe it's the exhaustion. Maybe you're just too numb. The girl helps you carry the spade back. Her silence is heavy. You want to believe she's just scared that she'll talk eventually. But deep down, you know the silence is something more. A shell, a defense, maybe even a curse. You work through the afternoon clearing out debris from a collapsed stable. A neighbor pays you with a crust of bread. It's hard as rock and speckled with mold. You break off the least green part and eat it anyway. The girl watches you chew, her eyes wide, but she doesn't ask for any. You hand it to her anyway. She eats slowly, methodically, like someone trained to expect nothing. Around mid-afternoon, a group of men rides through the village. Not soldiers, not knights, just armed men, bandits, maybe. They shout, knock on doors, demand food and valuables. Someone resists. You hear screaming, a crack, then silence. No one intervenes. No one even peeks outside. You grab the girl's hand and hide behind the haystack. You hold your breath. She does too. The men pass by. One stops. You freeze. He sniffs the air and moves on. You wait until you're sure they're gone before crawling out. Your heart doesn't slow down for an hour. The rest of the day is survival math. How much food do we have? How long will it last? How long can we go without clean water? What will we do when the firewood runs out? That night, your mother finally speaks. Her voice is dry. She tells you she thinks she's sick. You want to deny it. You want to argue, but the words don't come. You just sit next to her and hold her hand. Her skin is cold. Later, you and the girl lie down on the straw pile you now call a bed. The wind outside has calmed, but the dread hasn't. You think of your father, of your sister, of your village, of what tomorrow might bring. You fall asleep with your hand still clasping the girl's. In your sleep, you dream of a feast. Fresh bread, roasted meats, apples so sweet they drip with juice. But even in the dream, you're suspicious. You keep looking over your shoulder expecting the food to vanish, expecting someone to snatch it away. When you wake up, the taste of ash is still in your mouth. The girl is awake already. She's watching the fire, or what's left of it. Just red embers now. She finally speaks. One word. Cold. You nod. It's the first time you've heard her voice, and it's the saddest thing you've ever heard. Outside, the villagers are gathering in the square. A man in rags is preaching. He's loud, wild-eyed, calling for repentance, waving a wooden cross like a weapon. People nod, cry, chant along. Some look scared, others desperate. A few look empty. Your mother doesn't get out of bed. Her breathing is shallower. You try to feed her, but she turns her head away. You whisper promises, Liz, really that everything will be okay. She doesn't respond. Later, you walk to the well hoping for clean water. It's dry, just mud and bones. Someone threw a dead dog in it. A woman nearby shrieks at the sight. Another one just laughs, a dry, hollow sound, like the sound of something already broken. You come home empty-handed. The girl is collecting firewood twigs. Really, you help her. Neither of you speak. The silence between you's no longer awkward. It's an understanding, a contract. We suffer together. As night falls, you huddle inside. No fire, no food, just shadows and memories. You hold the girl's hand again, and for a moment, just a moment, you pretend this is normal, that this is life. You think about what you used to fear before all this. Spiders, failing a test, not getting picked for a game. And now you fear waking up. You fear not waking up. You fear becoming invisible, not in a poetic way, but in the way where no one notices if you disappear. You look around at the people still left, faces that have aged in just a few days, neighbors that once smiled, now hollow. You start to realize in the Middle Ages, grief isn't vent. It's a state of being. It's stitched into the seams of daily life. It's breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And in the corner of the room, the little girl draws something in the dirt with a stick, a circle, then a cross, then a flower. She looks at you, and for the first time, she smells, and that smell, however small, however fleeting, it breaks something inside you. Not in a bad way, in a way that reminds you you're still human, still capable of feeling, still alive. And that, my friend, was just your third day. Still think you'd survive the Middle Ages? Day 4 begins with a silence that feels unnatural. You wake not to the sound of chickens or footsteps, but to stillness, thick, eerie stillness. Even the wind seems hesitant. The fire has died again. Your mother's breathing is barely audible. You can't tell if she's asleep or fading. You sit up slowly, careful not to disturb the girl who's curled against your side like a shadow. The straw beneath you crunches. Your body aches in too many places to count. Muscles that didn't exist before now scream in protest. Your first mission, food. The apple tree in the back is bare. The pantry, if you can call a clay pot and a basket a pantry, is empty. You scavenge what you can. Few dried beans, some crumbs, a piece of cloth that once held cheese. You divide the crumbs into 3. Your mother eats nothing. You try to feed her, but her lips are too dry to chew. Eyes stay closed. You place the food beside her anyway, hoping. You and the girl walk to the edge of the woods. It's risky. The forest is dark and known to hide more than animals. But desperation is louder than fear. You find some nettles, a few wild mushrooms, risky, maybe even poisonous, but you take them anyway. Better risk than certainty. The girl finds a snail. She holds it up like treasure. You nod. Everything counts now. On the way back, you see another family leaving town, a mother carrying a bundle, a boy dragging a sack, a father pushing a wheelbarrow with a cross inside. They don't look at you. You don't wave. At home, you try to boil the mushrooms. There's no salt, no flavor, just bitterness and texture. The girl eats slowly. You don't tell her not to eat the snail raw. She already has. Your mother is still. You check her again. She's warm, barely, but the fever is rising. You place a wet cloth on her head. She flinches. That movement gives you hope. Later in the day, you try to gather firewood. The trees are picked clean. You pull dead branches from fences and neighbors' piles. No one complains. Everyone is doing the same. You see the blacksmith's wife crying. She's sitting on the road with her apron in her hands. There's blood on it. No one stops to ask why. A priest walks by, younger than most. He looks just as tired as the rest of you. He offers a prayer for your mother. You don't listen to the words, but you nod anyway. It's something, a thread of hope or habit. That night, a storm breaks. Rain pours through the thatched roof. You huddle under a blanket with the girl while your mother shivers on her bed of rags. Thunder rolls like distant drums. You tell the girl a story, not a real one, just something about a fox and a moon. You don't know why. Maybe because silence is heavier than the lie. She smiles faintly. That's enough. But the storm gets worse. The wind wails like a ghost outside, and water leaks through the roof in heavy droplets. You gather buckets, bowls, anything that might catch the rain. It's not enough. The floor is mud by midnight. The girl wakes coughing. Her face is pale, her hair soaked. You wrap her in your own cloak. It's thin and damp, but better than nothing. She says nothing more that night. Your mother moans in her sleep. Her fever is rising. You consider walking to the apothecary, but remember, he died last week. There's no one left who knows anything, just prayers and herbs. You crush some nettles into hot water. It's bitter. She drinks it anyway. Her hands shake. You sit beside her through the night, whispering the same story again. The one about the fox. But even that tale feels hollow now. Morning comes without light. Just a paler shade of gray. No bird song, no human voices. Just dripping, coughing, and the occasional creak of wind against the wood. You stare out the door and wonder not how long you'll last, but how long you'll stay human. Later that morning, you search the village for anything that might help. You pass houses that used to hold laughter, now only echoing with emptiness. A window swings open in the wind. You peek inside. No one. Just a doll left behind, face down in the dirt. You find a bucket of rainwater half full by a broken cart. You carry it home like treasure. The girl lights up when she sees it. You let her drink first. She finishes it in 3 gulps. You give your mother a sip with a spoon. She barely swallows. You try again. This time she turns her face. You leave the spoon on her lip until it falls. That afternoon, the air smells strange, like rot and wet wool. You hear a scream in the distance, then laughter, then silence again. It's always silence that stays. You and the girl mend a part of the roof with scrap wood. cloth. It's not much, but it stops the worst of the rain. As you work, she hums something, a tune with no words. You don't ask where she learned it. You just let it fill the space. At night, she curls beside you. She whispers, "Will we be okay?" You don't lie. You just squeeze her hand. And in the dark, she squeezes back. Later that night, you lie awake long after the girl has fallen asleep. The storm has passed, but the air inside the house still feels heavy, humid. You look up at the ceiling, trying to remember the color of the sky before all this blue. Right. You miss blue. You imagine what your old life might have looked like if you'd never been born in this century. A soft bed, warm food, a door that locks. The idea feels like a fairy tale now, a bedtime story you're too old to believe in. Then you hear something outside, a shuffling, soft, deliberate. You reach for a stick. You don't breathe. The girl stirs beside you. The sound fades. Was it a dog? A thief? A ghost? It doesn't matter. Everything is danger now. In that moment was just your fourth day. Still thinking of the Middle Ages. Your fifth day begins before the sun rises. You don't fall asleep. That you clutching the stick you laughed in the night. The girl is still beside you. Her hand still looking through yours. She sleeps light now. Always alert. Always happy like you. You check your mother. She's breathing but slow. Skin is hotter than ever. Eyes still closed. The fever is not breaking. You whisper name. Nothing. Unseen the storm is past. The left behind looks worse than before. Clings to everything. The walls collapsed into a stream of filth. A dead chicken lies in a puddle. You step over it without reacting. The village is changing. More doors are boarded up. More windows dark. You see a horse, loose and wild-eyed, galloping down the main road. No rider, no saddle, just chaos in motion. You make your way to the old chapel. It's said they keep food there for the desperate. Maybe it's a lie. Maybe not. You don't have much to lose. The girl follows close behind, holding on to your sleeve. The chapel door is cracked open. Inside, there are a few figures kneeling, not praying, just staring into nothing. A woman rocks back and forth. A man clutches a loaf of bread like it's a child. You approach the altar. No one stops you. There's a basket of turnips. You take two. You nod. You leave. Back home, you roast the turnips over a flame that barely stays alive. They taste like dirt and ash, but they fill your belly. The girl doesn't complain. She hasn't said a word since yesterday. You wash your mother's face again. Her breathing is raspy now. You speak to her softly, telling her about the turnips, the chapel, the rain. You imagine she hears it all. Later that day, a bell rings, not the church bell, a handbell, one the officials use when there has been a death. You count the rings, feet, then silence, then a scream, then nothing. You step outside and see two men carrying a covered body through the mud. A third walks behind them, ringing the bell again. The sound carries through the village like a curse. The girl tugs your arm and points. Another family, a few houses down, is packing their things. Not much, just bundles of clothes and a small sack of grain. They see you watching, but say nothing. One of them a boy, your age, nods. You nod back. Before nightfall, you check the traps near the edge of the woods. One of them has caught a rabbit. You almost cry. The girl gasps quietly. You carry it home with shaking hands. You skin and cook it the best you can. You've never done this before, but instinct guides you. The smell fills the air. The girl watches it roast, her eyes wide, her lips trembling. You divide the meat into three. You save the largest piece for your mother. She doesn't wake to eat it. That night, the girl finally speaks again. She whispers, "Will she get better?" You don't answer. You just tuck the blanket tighter around your mother and sit in the dark. You hear distant footsteps, soft, unhurried. You peek out and see a man in black. He carries a shovel and a sack. His face is hidden by a hood. No one dares speak to him. He is the grave digger. He works alone. He passes your house. He doesn't look in, but you feel he knows. You feel he's marking the door, counting the time. The girl asks if he's dead. You don't say yes, but you don't say no. Later, as the fire crackles low, you pull out the cloth bundle your mother kept hidden, some dried herbs, an old locket, a scrap of parchment with prayers scribbled in faded ink. You read them aloud, not because you believe, but because your voice breaks the silence. The girl falls asleep with her head on your lap. You sit still, watching shadows crawl up the wall. You think of summer, of laughter, of running barefoot through the grass. It feels like someone else's life, and then the wind picks up again. But the night isn't done. You lie there, eyes open, counting the drips from the roof. You try to keep track, to assign a rhythm to the chaos. It doesn't work. Your thoughts keep drifting to what might come next, to whether your mother will open her eyes again, to whether tomorrow will look any different. In the darkness, you feel the girl stir. She says, "I had a dream." You ask, "What about?" She says, "It was warm, that's all." You envy her. Even a dream like that is a treasure. The wind grows stronger, Something bangs outside. You don't move. You're too tired, too hollow. Whatever it is, it can wait. Eventually, you close your eyes, not because you're at peace, but because your body demands it. And as sleep takes you, the last thing you hear is your mother's breathe, shallow, fragile whisper. In your sleep, you hear voices, ones that don't belong to the village. Clear, calm, familiar. They talk of things like books, light bulbs, phones. You recognize the words, but they feel like fiction. You dream of the modern world, then wake up in a nightmare you can't escape. Morning light creeps in slowly, gray and cold. You stretch your legs, the girl still sleeps. You check your mother, her chest rises, barely. You light a new fire, gather the last of the dry straw. You put on water to boil and tell yourself today will be different, even if it's not. You step outside for just a minute. Cold bites at your cheeks, but you breathe deeply anyway. You need it. The air smells of wood smoke and wet earth. A few crows call in the distance. You wonder if they're watching. If they know, you walk past a neighbor's house. Someone has drawn a red mark on the door. You don't know who or why, but it chills you. The mark means something. Everything does now. And that, my friend, was just your 5th day. It's around 2 a.m. here in Orlando, Florida, and I can't sleep. So naturally, I started wondering, what would it really be like to survive as a medieval peasant? Not in the fairy tale version with knights and banquets and dragons, no. I'm talking about the mud, the hunger, and the back-breaking work. So, I decided to dive deep and figure out if someone like me who complains when the Wi-Fi lags could actually last a day in that world. And let me tell you, it's not looking good. Let's say you wake up one fine morning around the year 13. You're not a noble, not a merchant, not even a baker. You're a peasant. Congratulations, you're now one of about 85 to 90% of Europe's population. You own no land, you have very few possessions, and you probably live in a small, one-room hut shared with your spouse, kids, and maybe even a goat or two. Privacy? Never heard of it. Your day starts early, like before sunrise early. And not because you're a morning person, but because there's no electricity, no clocks, and no Starbucks to delay your misery. If the rooster's crowing, it's time to haul yourself out of bed, or rather, out of the pile of straw you sleep on. You wash your face in cold water from a wooden bucket and forget about toothpaste. A sprig of mint or sage will have to do. That's assuming you even have teeth left. Oral hygiene was not exactly a priority when you were just trying to survive each day. Breakfast, maybe a bit of bread coarse, dark, and hard enough to double as a self-defense weapon. If you're lucky, you'll have some porridge. And if it's a feast day or someone's gotten married and slaughtered a pig, you might even have a little bacon grease to flavor it. But don't get your hopes up. Also, forget about coffee. You might have ale or watered down wine instead, even in the morning. Then it's off to work. If you're a man, you're probably heading to the fields with a wooden plow and maybe an ox. If you're fortunate, women, you're tending animals, weaving, making cheese, fetching water, cooking for the family, mending clothes, or helping in the fields too. Children, they start working basically as soon as they can walk. The concept of childhood as we know it today didn't exist. If you could hold a rake, you could earn your keep. Oh, and forget about weekends. Sunday was for church, and you better go unless you want your neighbors to accuse you of heresy. Otherwise, every day is a work day. Rain or shine, you're out there breaking your back hoping the harvest is good, because if it's not, well, starvation is always around the corner. Drought, floods, or a sudden frost could mean your entire village goes hungry. Sanitation is not great. You have a pit latrine maybe, or you just go in the bushes. Bathing, maybe once a week if you're rich. If you're poor, let's be clear, it's more like once a season. Fleas and lice are your constant companions. Fun. Your clothes, likely made of coarse wool, are rarely washed. And your shoes, if you own any, might just be wooden clogs. Social life. It exists in a rough sort of way. You might go to the village tavern, which is really more of a smoky room with stale beer, but hey, it's better than nothing. You exchange news, gossip, and maybe catch a traveling minstrel if one happens by. But most of your relationships revolve around your family, your fellow villagers, and the local priest, who wields terrifying social power. Speaking of power, don't even think about complaining to the authorities. There's no HR department in the 14th century. Your lord owns your land, your labor, and basically your life. If he says jump, you jump. If you don't, there's always the stocks, or the lash, or worse. Justice is swift, brutal, and usually unfair. And heaven help you if you owe taxes. And medicine, good luck with that. You break a bone and someone might set it with no anesthesia. You get a toothache and they'll pull it also with no anesthesia. Got the plague? Say your prayers. Your best bet for healing might be a charm, a leech, or a priest's blessing. The line between doctor and witch wasn't always clear. Despite it all, people laughed. They celebrated festivals, harvest feasts, saints' days, and midsummer fairs. They danced, drank, and fell in love. because even when life was bleak, humans still found ways to be human. Music, storytelling, and even crude jokes were all part of daily survival. You'd think people in that time had no energy left for joy, but you'd be wrong. Weddings were wild, noisy affairs that could last for days. Seasonal festivals involved colorful costumes, games, bonfires, and even amateur plays. Laughter echoed through the fields during communal harvests, and neighbors helped each other in a tight web of support, part kindness, part survival instinct. People didn't just survive, they found meaning. Superstitions, religion, and local folklore provided a framework to understand the chaos of life. Dreams were interpreted. Stars were read. You might tie garlic to your door to ward off evil spirits, or hang a horseshoe above your hearth for luck. And yes, your mother-in-law probably believed in fairies. So could you survive as a medieval peasant? Physically, maybe. Mentally, emotionally, spiritually? That's a whole other question. But stick with me, we're just getting started. In the next part, we'll dig into how you build your home, find food, make clothes, raise children, and maybe even cheat the tax collector if you're clever enough. Let's see if you'd really make it past day one. Because surviving in the Middle Ages wasn't just about staying alive. It was about keeping your dignity, your hope, and your sense of humor intact. And that, my friend, might be the toughest part of all. Now, imagine this. It's the dead of winter, and your food stores are running low. The root cellar is nearly empty, and hunting is out of the question because wild animals are scarce, and you don't exactly have a bow or the skill to use it. You're down to boiling cabbage water and chewing on old bread. Your children are hungry. You're hungry. And the worst part, there's still 2 more months of winter. You get creative. You patch holes in your clothes with scraps of old garments. You barter with neighbors. Maybe some eggs for a handful of grain. Maybe you take a risk and poach a rabbit from the Lord's forest, hoping no one sees. If they do, you're in serious trouble. But survival sometimes means bending the rules. That's life for a medieval peasant, a constant balancing act between hardship and ingenuity. You wake up each day with the same worries, but also with a sliver of determination. You cling to traditions, to stories, to each other. Because when everything around you is uncertain, those small things become everything. All right? So you've made it past day one as a medieval peasant. Congrats. You didn't die of dysentery. Yet. But don't get cocky. There's still a long year ahead. And the next challenge is building and maintaining the very thing that keeps you alive, your home. Let's start with location. If you're lucky, your village was settled near a stream or river. Water is life, not just for drinking, but for washing, rarely cooking, irrigating your small plot of land, and occasionally dumping your waste downstream and pretending that solves the problem. Your hut is likely built from wattle and daub a fancy way of saying sticks, mud, and animal dung. The roof, thatched straw, the smell, somewhere between wet dog and barn in summer. Inside your home, there's not much. One room, maybe a single wooden bed shared by the whole family. No, really. If you're lucky, there's a table. You eat, sleep, work, and maybe even give birth in the same tiny space. There's a central hearth, not just for warmth and cooking, but because there's no chimney smoke, simply rises and escapes through a hole in the roof, or more often, just lingers. Winter is rough. Cold seeps in through every crack, and snow might drift inside through the thatch. You patch holes with straw and fabric. You huddle for warmth, not out of affection, but necessity. Your livestock might even sleep indoors with you again, not for fun, but for the heat. And if your home burns down, which happens more often than you'd think, you're rebuilding it by hand with help from neighbors and prayers for good weather. Now, food. You're not starving exactly, but it's a constant concern. Most of your meals revolve around bread, pottage, a kind of stew made from grains and vegetables, and more bread. If you're really lucky, you'll get eggs, cheese, or dried fish. Meat is rare. Hunting is usually reserved for nobles, and poaching is dangerous. But desperate times call for desperate rabbits. You grow vegetables, cabbage, onions, leeks, maybe some turnips if you're fancy. Fruits are seasonal and often used immediately or dried. There's no refrigeration, so preservation is everything. You might smoke meat, pickle vegetables, or store grain in sacks in your loft. Your biggest enemies, mold, rats, and time. Every peasant pays rent or tax in some form, money, goods, or labor. The lord of the manor gets a cut of your harvest, your wool, maybe even a chicken or two. You also owe him labor, fixing fences, working his fields, or helping with construction projects. That means even during your busiest seasons, you're also working for someone else. It's like having 2 full-time jobs and no vacation. Then there's the church. Beyond weekly mass, you pay tithes 10% of everything you produce. Got 10 eggs? One goes to the church raised a pig, the priest gets a chop. But the church isn't just a tax collector, it's also your doctor, your school, and your community center. The priest records births, marriages, deaths. He offers advice, hears your confessions, and might be your only source of news from the outside world. Speaking of news, most peasants never travel more than a few miles from home. The world is small. Your village is your universe. Roads are bad, and the forest between towns can be dangerous. Thieves, wolves, and worse like unpaid tolls. If you want to go anywhere, you'll probably walk. Maybe you'll hitch a ride in a cart if you're old or injured. But don't count on Uber. Shoes are made of leather or wood and probably full of holes. Now, about those taxes. Occasionally, the king sends collectors through, demanding coin for wars you'll never see, and policies you'll never understand. If you can't pay, they take goods. If you don't have goods, they take livestock. If you hide them, they might take you or throw you in a manorial court where the judge is the same guy who owns your land. Fair? Not really. But it's either that or a fine that takes a year to repay. Still, despite the struggle, life goes on. You learn to work with the land. You understand its moods, when to sow, when to reap, when to let it rest. You know which herbs help with a cough and which ones to avoid unless you want to hallucinate for 3 days. You become resourceful, clever, and quietly defiant. You find joy in small victories. A good harvest, a dry roof, a baby born healthy, and you laugh. Because if you didn't, you'd cry. So you joke with your neighbors while tilling the fields. You sing while churning butter. You teach your kids to recite old tales and tell them about saints who made it through worse. You don't know what the next day will bring, but you know you'll face it with calloused hands, a stiff back, and just enough humor to keep going. You've survived another season, and with that, you're officially more than a tourist in medieval life. But let's not sugarcoat it. Every season brings its own brand of terror. In spring, your survival hinges on the thaw. Will the snowmelt flood your field? Will the seeds you saved sprout properly? One bad storm could wash out weeks of work. If your neighbor falls ill, you help them plant not just out of kindness, but because next year it might be you. Summer means long hours. You rise before the sun, and sometimes don't stop working until it sets. You mend tools with makeshift fixes, scrape together extra time to weave baskets or thatch roofs, and pray the heat doesn't bake your crops into dust. If lightning strikes the granary, well, so much for winter food. Autumn is make or break. It's harvest time, the make or break moment. Your hands are cracked and calloused. Your back aches, but you don't dare rest. Every stalk of grain is precious. You store what you can, celebrate with a village feast, and still lie awake at night wondering if it'll be enough. Sometimes it's not. And winter is always a gamble. Cold, hunger, illness. You brace for it with layered wool, salted food, and pure grit. You gather your family close. You tell stories to pass time. You whisper prayers to saints. And when the worst finally passes, when you see the first buds of spring, you feel like you've cheated death again. Next, we'll talk about marriage, raising children, and how gossip in a tiny village could ruin or save your life. Let's talk about love, or, more accurately, marriage, medieval style. Because if you thought dating today was complicated, just wait until your entire future depends on whether your family can trade a goat and some barley for a decent match. In your village, marriage isn't exactly about passion. It's about survival, reputation, and keeping land within the community. If you're a young man, you're expected to have a roof over your head, tools to work the land, and enough livestock to prove you're not a total waste of a dowry. If you're a young woman, your value might depend more on your family's standing, your skills in weaving or milking, and sorry to say it, your childbearing potential. Romance? Maybe, but it's not the point. Weddings are big deals, though. They're one of the few times the whole village gathers to celebrate something joyful. Picture this: flower garlands, bread, and ale flowing, maybe even a fiddler. The ceremony happens in the church, led by the local priest, followed by a loud and slightly chaotic feast. If you're lucky, there's roast meat and dancing. If you're not, there's watery soup and a drunken uncle trying to sing ballads. Once married, your life shifts. Roles are sharply defined. Men work the land and make decisions, in theory. Women manage the household, raise children, cook, sew, and care for the sick or elderly. But in reality, women also worked the fields, mended fences, and did whatever was necessary. Everyone pitched in. No one could afford to be idle. Now, about those kids, you start young. Families are large, not necessarily by choice, but because child mortality is high. Having 10 children doesn't mean all 10 will survive. Illness, hunger, accidents, they're constant threats. Still, children are treasured. They're your labor force, your legacy, and maybe your old age insurance if you live long enough to need it. Childbirth is dangerous. No hospitals, no epidurals, no doctors, just midwives, prayers, and luck. Many women didn't survive it, and if they did, they might do it again within the year. Despite that, many found joy in raising children. Kids learned fast. They helped in the garden, fetched water, and learned skills from watching their parents. Education was hands-on, reading rare, unless you were training for the clergy. Counting, important only if you were measuring grain. Discipline was strict. Parents didn't have time for tantrums. The world was harsh, and children had to be tougher than their modern counterparts. Stories were told not just for fun, but to teach lessons about work, obedience, and avoiding danger. And yes, the occasional tale about a naughty child eaten by wolves was fair game. And then there's gossip. In a small village, privacy doesn't exist. Everyone knows everything or thinks they do. Who skipped Mass? Who's behind on taxes? Who's pregnant but not married? That kind of information spreads fast, and it matters. Reputation can mean the difference between getting help when your roof collapses or being left to fix it alone. A good name is worth more than gold. Gossip isn't just petty, it's powerful. It shapes marriages, business deals, even your fate in manorial court. If people believe you're honest, hard-working, or especially boss, they'll back you up. If they think you're lazy, immoral, or unlucky, yes, that was a thing. You might find yourself isolated. Words could build or break a life. Still, community matters. When hardship hits, like a sick child, a house fire, or crop failure, neighbors show up. They bring bread, they help rebuild, they share what little they have, because they know next time it might be them. Solidarity wasn't optional. It was survival. And occasionally there is love, not the Hollywood kind, but quiet moments. A shared smile over the fire. A husband saving the last bit of stew for his wife. A woman stitching her child's name into a tunic. People cared for each other. They mourned. They rejoiced, they argued and forgave. It was messy and human. So yes, you could find happiness in a medieval village. But it was different from what we imagine today. It came from security, from being part of something larger than yourself. It came from seeing your children grow, from hearing your neighbor call you friend, from making it through another winter side by side. Next up, we'll explore the darker side: illness, injury, and what happened when you couldn't pull your weight anymore. Because in a world without mercy, even a sprained ankle could change everything. Still, life in the village had its own rhythms, shaped by the turning of the seasons and the pulse of community life. When a child was born, the entire village celebrated. Neighbors brought small gifts, bread, eggs, herbs. Midwives were thanked, sometimes with a jar of honey or a woven shawl. A baptism wasn't just a religious ritual, it was a moment of hope for everyone. Festivals marked the year like mileposts. May Day, harvest feasts, and Saints' Days offered rare chances to eat well, dance, and maybe even flirt a little. Villagers wore their best tunics, painted wooden masks, and gathered around bonfires. There was laughter, music, and the sweet relief of not working for just one day. In between the toil and tradition, there were friendships. Two women might share secrets while spinning wool. A man might carve a toy for his neighbor's son. Children invented games with sticks and stones, and elders passed on stories from generations past. These moments were small but powerful, a reminder that joy was still possible, even when the world was hard. And for those lucky enough to grow old, there was a different kind of honor. Elders were respected not just for their age, but for their knowledge. They advised on planting cycles, remembered famines and floods, and blessed weddings and births. Their lives were a living library. In a place where time moved slowly and change came only with hardship, it was the people who made life worth living. Their kindness, their endurance, their humor, and their deep, unwavering belief that tomorrow might just be better if everyone pulled together. That, perhaps more than anything, is how love survived in the Middle Ages. Let's say it's a cold morning. You wake up and can't stand on your left leg. Maybe it's just twisted. Maybe it's broken. Maybe it's infected. Whatever it is, you can't walk to the field, and suddenly your entire survival is at risk. In the Middle Ages, illness and injury were more than just health concerns. They were existential threats. No hospitals, no modern medicine, no health insurance. If you were hurt or sick, your options were limited. Home remedies, prayers, and whatever help your neighbors could spare. Let's start with the basics. Minor injuries. A cut on your hand from harvesting wheat? You wrap it in cloth, maybe rinse it with a little wine if you have any to spare. That's about it. Infection is a constant threat. Even a splinter could turn deadly. A broken bone might be set by a village elder, or the blacksmith is really. An infected tooth? Yanked out with pliers. No anesthesia. Just a good dose of local ale and some screaming. For more serious issues like fevers, rashes, or mysterious pains, you'd call the local healer. Maybe an old woman who knows herbs. Maybe the village priest. They'd offer you a tea of willow bark for pain, or a paste of garlic and honey for wounds. Leeching was common, based on the belief that illness came from an imbalance of bodily humors. Bloodletting, vomiting, sweating, these were your treatments. Some remedies worked, many didn't. But hope mattered. You believed in saints and relics. You prayed to Saint Sebastian for protection from plague, Saint Apollonia for toothaches. The church was your pharmacy and your therapist. Pilgrimages were a kind of spiritual health retreat, if you could make the journey. Then came the big killers, the plague, dysentery, tuberculosis, childbirth. There were no vaccines, no antibiotics. If a disease came to your village, you couldn't run. You'd care for the sick, bury the dead, and hope you weren't next. Entire communities could vanish in weeks, and still, somehow, people endured. Old age, if you reached it, was both a blessing and a curse. Arthritis, failing eyesight, and chronic pain were normal. You worked until you couldn't. And then what? If your children were kind and still alive, they cared for you. If not, you relied on charity or were left behind. Some villages had almshouses run by monasteries where the poor and elderly could go. But space was limited and comfort was minimal. Disability meant dependence. A limp, a missing hand, blindness, these made survival harder. But medieval people weren't heartless. The community stepped in when it could. A man who couldn't plow might mend tools. A woman who couldn't walk might spin wool. As long as you could contribute something, you were part of the fabric. But fall completely out of the system, then life turned cruel fast. Mental health? Not understood. Madness was seen as a spiritual issue, punishment from God or possession by demons. People with mental illness were feared, sometimes hidden away, sometimes revered as holy fools. Treatment ranged from prayers to exorcisms. Compassion existed, but it was tangled up with superstition. Despite all of this, people survived. They adapted. They grew strong not because they wanted to, but because they had no other choice. And they didn't face it alone. The strength of the medieval world wasn't in its medicine. It was in its people. Imagine lying in your hut, feverish and aching. Your neighbor brings broth. The priest stops by with a prayer. A child from the village fetches water. No one is rich. No one has much. But everyone gives what they can, not out of luxury, but out of understanding. Because they know next time it might be them. And sometimes people recovered. They walked again. They healed even without understanding how. They lived to see spring, to harvest their fields, to laugh again. And in a world where death sat close, every extra day felt like a miracle. So, yes, medieval health care was terrifying, but it wasn't hopeless. It was human, fragile, and astonishingly resilient. Next, well, look at what happened when things went wrong on a larger scale. Fires, floods, famines, and what it meant to survive disaster when all you had was your neighbors and sheer determination. Consider for a moment the sheer fragility of medieval existence. One dry season and your crops fail. One heavy rain and your village floods. One spark from a cooking fire and half the homes go up in smoke. There are no fire departments, no emergency funds, no government food programs. You are your own disaster response unit. Take fire, for example. Most homes were made of wood and thatch. One overturned candle, one gust of wind in the wrong direction, and flames could consume everything. Buckets were filled and passed hand to hand. Wells were drained. People fought flames with wet cloaks and prayers. And if it didn't work, you rebuilt. No insurance, just community and sheer grit. Floods came quickly and often. A swollen river after spring thaw could turn fields into swamps and carry off livestock, grain, even entire huts. Roads became impassable. Trade stopped, and the standing water, a breeding ground for disease. When disaster struck, the first instinct wasn't panic, it was action. Everyone helped everyone, because if they didn't, the village didn't make it. And famine, perhaps the most terrifying threat of all. It didn't come with sound or fury, it crept in slowly. First, the granaries ran low, then meals got smaller, then people started dying. Children first, the old, the weak. You rationed, you bartered, you foraged. Bark, acorns, anything that might fill a belly. Sometimes you begged, sometimes you stole, and sometimes you simply endured. Through it all, the only constant was each other. Resilience came not from comfort, but from connection. You survived not because you were strong, but because someone shared their bread, patched your roof, held your hand when your fever broke. That's the truth of medieval survival. It wasn't noble or glamorous. It was raw, often brutal, but deeply communal. And in that community, in those bonds formed through hardship, there was something incredibly human. So, before we step away from this medieval world, well, take one final look at the rituals that held people together, the songs, the funerals, the festivals that gave meaning to the toil. Because even in the darkest winters, people still found time to dance. So far, you've worked the fields, raised a family, survived sickness, and even lived through disaster. But what gave all of it meaning? For a medieval peasant, It wasn't gold or glory. It was ritual, rhythm, and the hope that something greater was watching. Let's begin with the calendar. Your year is shaped not by vacations or tax deadlines, but by feast days, saints' days, and harvest festivals. These weren't just religious events. They were your time off, your social life, your cultural education. You might not know the names of distant kings, but you sure knew when to fast, when to feast, and when to dance around a bonfire. Church bells were your clock. Mass was your routine. Life revolved around the local chapel births, marriages, deaths, all marked by ritual. Baptism within days of birth, marriage before the whole village, death followed by a wake, candles, prayers, and burial in consecrated ground. Even if you didn't understand Latin, you felt the rhythm of faith in your bones. Music played a big role. No Spotify, but plenty of singing. Work songs in the field, lullabies at night, hymns on Sunday. Maybe someone had a fiddle or flute. Maybe a traveling minstrel wandered through with a ballad from the next town over. Music wasn't background noise, it was how stories were remembered, emotions expressed, and spirits lifted. Dancing came next. Yeah, peasants danced. On feast days, in open fields or muddy squares, someone would bang a drum or clap a rhythm, and off you went. Maybe it was awkward, maybe it was wild, but it was yours. Children joined, elders clapped. Joy didn't need polish, it needed community. Food rituals mattered too. The harvest meal was more than just eating, it was gratitude in action. Villages brought whatever they had: bread, cheese, fruit, maybe a roasted chicken if someone had a good year. You didn't feast often, but when you did, it was sacred. Not just because it was rare, but because it was shared. Storytelling was another anchor. In the evenings, by firelight, the old folks told tales, saints who walked on water, forest spirits who stole your socks, cunning foxes, brave maidens, foolish kings. These weren't just entertainment, they were lessons, morals wrapped in fantasy, warnings cloaked in wonder. Even funerals had beauty. Sure, death was ever present, but it didn't mean it went unnoticed. The village stopped. Bells rang, neighbors wept, prayers were whispered, and for a moment, everything paused. You remembered that life, even short and harsh, mattered. That someone's existence had touched yours. Weddings were the opposite. Loud, messy, joyful. They lasted for days if you could afford it. Music, laughter, a blessing from the priest, and then drinking until the cows got curious. A wedding meant hope. It meant another cycle had begun. Then there were the quiet rituals, the sign of the cross before planting seeds, a candle lit for someone gone, touching a relic when you were afraid. These gestures, small and constant, tied you to something greater, to God, to the earth, to each other. And when the seasons changed, so did you. Spring brought new lambs, buds on trees, and cautious joy. Summer was labor, long and sweaty. Autumn brought reward, feasts, and preparation. Winter was rest, storytelling, and endurance. Each cycle reinforced that life moved forward even when it felt stuck. You weren't alone. That was the point. Everything, joy, sorrow, sickness, celebration, was shared. Your story was part of the village story. Your hardship wasn't hidden, and neither was your happiness. People remembered your name. They helped bury your parents. They blessed your newborn. They told your tales long after you were gone. So, could you survive as a medieval peasant? Maybe, but the real question is, could you belong? Because in a world of hardship, the secret to survival wasn't just strength. It was belonging. It was ritual. It was the quiet, powerful truth that even in the mud and cold and pain, life still had meaning. And that's what kept people going. And maybe, just maybe, it's what still does. Let's not forget the rituals around work itself. Tasks weren't just chores. They followed patterns, songs, even little ceremonies. Before planting, you might bless the soil or sprinkle it with water. When harvesting, some villages kept the last sheaf as sacred, offering it to ensure good fortune for next year. Superstition and religion walked hand in hand, blending the sacred and the practical. Even how you dressed told a story. Your clothes were simple, undid wool, rough linen, but they were mended with care, passed down between siblings, sometimes even blessed. A woman might embroider a pattern on a sleeve, not for beauty, but because her grandmother did the same. A man might wear a belt his father had owned, believing it brought strength. These things had meaning. They reminded you that you were part of a line, a legacy. Symbols were everywhere. A cross carved above a doorway, a wooden spoon kept from childhood, handful of soil taken from a family plot before moving to a new village. These objects weren't just keepsakes, they were anchors. In a world full of change and loss, they rooted you. Community rituals also helped with justice and memory. When someone wronged another, public apologies might be made. When a conflict arose, elders or the priest mediated. Decisions were made not just for individuals, but for the good of all. You weren't just punished or praised, you were reintegrated. Because the goal wasn't exile, it was belonging. Then there were seasonal acts of kindness, unspoken agreements. You'd share salt with a neighbor in winter, help repair their roof after a storm, watch their children when someone fell ill. These moments weren't celebrated with banners. but they were remembered. They built trust, and they made you more than just a peasant. They made you someone worth counting on. The truth is, medieval survival wasn't just about making it through the day. It was about making the day matter through rituals, rhythms, symbols, and stories. Peasants gave shape to lives that otherwise might have seemed small. They created a world where even suffering had structure, where even death had dignity. So, when we look back at their lives, it's easy to focus on the hardship. But beneath it was something stronger, a deep, persistent, almost defiant sense of meaning. A sense that being alive, being connected, was worth something. And in that, maybe they were richer than we think.